The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast. Hello there, and welcome to the Force of Others podcast. I'm Zachary, Owen Turner.
I'm Matt Beutner.
We're back, episode 5.
Episode 5.
We got a whole lot to talk about today. Today's mainly about canceled projects, including the Acolyte. But before we get into all that, Matt, how was your week? How did Star Wars reach you this week?
Well, Star Wars reached me probably the same way that it reached a lot of you watching the show, including Zach. The biggest thing was within hours of us recording, it was announced that the Acolyte was not going to be renewed for a second season. We'll get into all that over the course of the show, so I kind of spent the week just kind of thinking about that, and that sounds depressing, but maybe it's meaningful that arguably the most depressing Star Wars movie is The Empire Strikes Back, which is episode 5, and this is in fact our episode 5.
Oh, that's good.
But we're not. This isn't just going to be a episode about mourning and stuff. Like we are going to talk about the Acolyte, but we're also going to, I guess, kind of gamify this situation. We're going to end the podcast. There's going to be a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today, but one of the last things we're going to talk about is Zach and my top 5 canceled Star Wars projects that we wish we could see. So, you know, you're going to get some of our insight on the things that we wish we had and we don't. But what about you, Zach? How was your week?
It was good. I mean, it was a lot of, back and forth between Matt and I just being like, do we need to do an emergency episode real quick? But I'm glad we waited because I think a lot more has come out to talk about it. And, you know, it's still, we'll get into it, but, it was just like, oh, is this happening? How is this happening? Has anyone actually confirmed it? You know, so it's been a very mysterious Star Wars week for me. But, yeah, other than that, it was a good week. So.
Yeah, right on. And I do want to say one thing before we get into all the Acolyte stuff, because I think this is an important distinction to say. I was very disappointed by the Deadline article that it said the Acolyte was canceled. And there's a lot of... And that's because it's going to get clicks. Canceled is better, sounds better than not renewed. But the reality was, outside of some Leslie Headland interviews saying about, different things that she had planned for Season 2, so far as we know, there was no pre-production work. Every interview we have seen before it was officially announced was all the actors saying, we hope we get to do it again. We would love to come back. It was not canceled. It was not renewed. There will be people that'll say, who cares? It's the same thing, but it is not the same thing. This is not them backing up. This is they did what they were hired to do, and Lucasfilm has decided that the job is done. So I just wanted to say that from the jump.
Well, let's get into it then. The end, ? Of the Acolyte. Matt, what are your overall thoughts on the not renewal?
Yeah. It sounds so silly, because at the end of the day, canceled is a better sentence. But, the mouse giveth and the mouse taketh away, as it were, I suppose. I talked about in one of the episodes that I like that we are in the corporate era of Star Wars. Overall, I think that is good. It reminds me of, we've talked about how you're not a Trekkie, but it reminds me of Star Trek in the 80s and 90s, where there was a lot of content coming out. And the reality of there being a lot of content coming is that not all of it is going to be stuff that you necessarily like. Just to stick with Star Trek. Star Trek the Motion Picture, in my opinion, not very great. Quite boring. The next one, Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, one of my favorite movies of all time. And then it kind of kept going like that. Like that one I wouldn't really like, and then this next one is one of my favorite things ever. So when there's more stuff coming, not all of it is going to hit for everybody, but you never know what isn't going to be your favorite thing. But then the other side of being corporate is that we're going to get things that are going to go away. That appears to be, at least as of right now, that appears to be the case. But what about you, Zach?
Yeah, my biggest qualm with it is that Lucasfilm has not come out and had an official statement on it. And we're getting everything through Deadline and Forbes and all of these other sites being like, they've said that they're not going to renew it. And yet we have Celebration coming up, and they're bringing Manny Jacinto there to, like, have a panel, you know? So it's like, it's very weird, the timing of it as well. I'm just kind of confused by it. And, you know, we still haven't gotten an official statement on it. So, yes, we have a bunch of news saying that it's been not renewed, but we still don't actually know for sure until Lucasfilm comes out and is official saying, hey, this isn't going to be renewed. That being said, I think, you know, what you said before the last podcast is totally true. Like, just because it's the end of the show doesn't mean it's the end of these characters. You know, there's going to be hopefully books and, I mean, they've already announced some books, but, you know, they could continue it on in books or an animated show or, you know, comics, you know, just because these characters might not be on the big screen, or I guess you'd say the small screen, doesn't mean that we're not going to get them anymore. I do think it is a, very, not a waste, but, you know, a tragedy, I would say, that, you know, we're not going to see Manny Jacinto and Amandla Stenberg, you know, two great actors in the show that really captivated a lot of people, you know, not get to see them do it again. But who knows, you know, maybe it's not renewed for this year and then it's renewed for next year, or, you know.
Well, and I got one more thing just about the corporate of it all. It is very likely that Lucasfilm will never comment on it officially. Like, we talked about it earlier in one of the episodes. The whole, like, the Rian Johnson trilogy was announced and straight up never spoken of again by Lucasfilm. You know, I talked about how John Kasdan announced that there were plans for sequels to Solo. Lucasfilm never commented on it either way, right? And Justin Simeon with the Lando show was not initially told by Lucasfilm reps that the show wasn't going to happen anymore, that it was now a movie and was given to Donald Glover. We don't know. I'm not trying to villainize Lucasfilm in this moment, but it's the downside of the corporate thing, that they're going to be very, very careful about what they do announce and what they don't. Yeah. You know.
Totally true. Well, let's get into our next point then. What are the narratives versus the facts on why it was canceled? I think it's not a shock to anyone that this was review bombed. I mean, out of the wazoo, which doesn't help any show. But when a certain sect of the fans decide that they do not like a show, boy howdy, do they go in and make sure that show is going to be reviewed to death, you know? And that's really the toxic part of the fandom, which kind of sucks, because it can really ruin it for the rest of us, or for the rest of the people that, you know, this is their favorite thing of all time, you know? But what are your thoughts on the narratives versus the facts versus the Leslie Headland versus the D23 scandal, you know?
Well, D23 scandal?
Oh, you don't know about the D23 scandal?
I guess not. What was the D23 scandal?
There is there are some theories on why it's canceled is to try and drive up Disney Plus subscriptions, because unfortunately somebody in one of at Disney Springs in Orlando, at the Raglan Road restaurant, someone was fed an allergy that they said that they had, and unfortunately passed from it. They are suing Disney because it's on Disneyland and the restaurant, and Disney has said, well, you signed a Disney Plus terms and conditions that you can't sue us. Or basically, like, some legalese in the Disney Plus subscription that basically we're not liable on this anymore. You cannot come at us legally. And a lot of people rightfully were like, okay, well, I'm just going to cancel my Disney Plus subscription. That's not cool. That person lost their life. And, it is the restaurant. It's come out that the restaurant is privately owned, so it's also on them. And it's a big legal thing that is really sad because it's a loss of somebody's life. And Disney has not been the coolest on being supportive or anything like that. They've been very lawyered up and like, look, no, and also you signed this Disney Plus subscription, and so people are canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions. So some people have said like, oh, maybe they're canceling the show so that you go on Disney Plus and you request a second season, which you will show that you want, more stuff, and we'll subscribe again and all of that. But
well, right on. I didn't know about any of that. That's terrible. Objectively, that is bad. Obviously. And again, I don't want this to be the episode about corporate Star Wars, but it's kind of like you said in episode 2. Greed happens when anything gets too big. Mm-hmm. We talked about the Jedi kind of overgrowing their ability to be in the people and of the people. It's whatever, and this is a conversation for the force of capitalism. So, I don't know. So narratives versus facts as to why the show was canceled. I want to also put this on Front Street because these people do exist. If you are I'm going to look right down the barrel. If you are a racist or a misogynist and you are a Star Wars fan, you have missed the point of the franchise that you love, and that's really all I have to say about that. Now, that being said, while those people do exist, I do think there are a lot of people that have actual criticisms, and that's at least the people that I've actually spoken to. There's a lot of people that actually did have criticisms about the show that they just didn't like it. Now, as far as the review bombing, that's the state of where we are. And there's a lot of people that have talked about review bombing. There's a lot of people that think it doesn't exist. It does. You can look it up, and you can see, more often than not, a show that gets review bombed is a show that has been classified as quote-unquote woke, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't news. And if anybody somehow doesn't know what review bombing is, that is people that don't like a thing will tell all of their followers to negatively review a thing and send bots to negatively review a thing, oftentimes whether or not they have even seen the thing that they're reviewing. There were also negative critical reviews, because there will be people that will hear us saying this and think that we are shills. You can look at our view counts. We do not have... we are at this point a tiny podcast.
And I will say, the show has problems.
Sure.
Just to, put a... not to... Yes, we want to see a second season because we enjoy the characters and where it was going. But yeah, it has its problems. But so does all of Star Wars.
That's...
all of
yes.
it.
Yes.
There's not a perfect movie, one in history. There is not one thing creatively that does not have problems, because that is art. Art always has problems, and yes. And does the show have problems? Yes. Check out our second or third episode. We talk about the problems that it has, Actually, I think that's our first episode.
Our first episode. We talked about our likes, and then we went into a lot of dislikes. Yeah. But Lance put it very, very eloquently last week, talking about how, a line in a thing is bad, or you don't like a line of dialogue. Therefore, that show is bad in your mind. Or a Jedi does a bad thing, therefore the Jedi are bad. And like you said, no Star Wars movie is perfect. Luke kissed his sister in The Empire Strikes Back, right? The real reason is because they had no clue that Leia was going to turn out to be Luke's sister. No idea. But if you try to expect the art that you consume to be perfect, number one, that standard of perfection is based on you and your life experience. But it's never going to be perfect. But so narratives versus facts as to why it was canceled. The narrative is that the show, narratives of the show, tried to push a woke agenda and failed. There are fans that are fighting for quote-unquote true Star Wars. And Rolling Stone put out a whole article about how Star Wars is not going to survive people that are fighting for a Star Wars that never existed. You can seek it out. It was a decent read. But that's the narrative, right? In my opinion, the facts are that the show was not renewed because of the numbers. We don't have all of the data that Disney has. And I've seen articles that say The Acolyte was watched just as much as other Star Wars shows. I've seen data. You can look up the Nielsen numbers, which break streaming shows down versus how many minutes it was watched, a show was watched. And you can see based on those numbers, The Acolyte was very, very high for the 2-episode premiere and steadily dropped every week. And that's not an altered narrative. That is not somebody changed the data. You can see it. And in my opinion, when you can see how expensive the show was to make, and Disney then sees that there is a diminishing return week by week, potentially coupled with all the bad press, they're not gonna renew it. Solo made millions of dollars. They ultimately made the movie twice, which is why the budget was so huge. And so then when it wasn't a blockbuster, they were like, okay, we're going to bury this. And here we are, I think 7 years later, and still hearing about how there might be a Lando show or a Lando movie eventually, even though that was something that everybody liked. Fan opinions don't necessarily save or kill a thing. Money does. Taking it back to corporate thing. Just at the end of the day, the show cost a lot and they did not get a big return on investment. But that's why I think it was quote unquote not renewed. But what are your thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, we don't have all the numbers that Disney does. I know a lot of people, a lot of friends that I have that watched the first 2 episodes, and they're like, I was kind of bored, and I don't know if I'm gonna watch the rest. And it takes me being like, no, like, you gotta watch this lightsaber fight. It's really cool, like the characters get super deep after the 3rd episode. Like, it's the whole TV shows back in the day. The thing that also gets me on why this is canceled is TV shows back in the day. You used to have to tell somebody, hey, the show is so good, but you have to get through the first season because it's bad. Like, there are so many TV shows that we've been, like, I mean, especially like sci-fi shows. I mean, a lot of the CW shows, you'd be like, man, season 2 is so good, but you really have to get through season 1 because you got to know what happens. And they're really trying to find themselves. So it's not great, but if you can make it through season 1, you're going to love the show. And so we're not giving shows that breath anymore because it's like, well, it didn't do the numbers, cancel it. We're not going to renew it, And if you look at this show, it really didn't find its footing until episode 4 or 5, And then it was cooking with gas, but a lot of people fell off because it was just kind of slow. And there's another thing we're not talking about with The Acolyte is how many shows came out at the same time as The Acolyte. I mean, while it was running, you also had The Boys and Game of Thrones, or House of Dragon, and I think two or three other huge shows that were on there, like 5th or 6th season, 4th or 5th season, that had been established. And I mean, Game of Thrones is a powerhouse, that takes viewers, and it's in the middle of the summer when everybody's on vacation, and it's not syndicated at home Tuesday night. Oh, we're all home from work and school. Let's sit down and watch. So part of it is also the release, when it was released. If this was released in the fall, it might have done a little bit better, But
yeah, that's true. Well, and it's talking about the Tuesday night release of a show. Again, we're aging ourselves, right? Like you said, that's a really good point. That back in my day, shows would get years ordered. To let them find their footing. Now, obviously, you want to talk about sci-fi shows, like the trump card that everybody always pulls for shows getting canceled too soon is Firefly, right? Joss
Which also
Whedon
has a great first season.
It's cooking with gas from moment one.
It's the network that messed it up. It's the network that messed it up.
It's the nature of, so much money goes into these things that not to take the side of the companies, but at the end of the day, if they're not making a profit off that particular product is going to go away so that they can find something else to keep the lights on. I'm not trying to say that Bob Iger and Disney need more money. That is not what, but that's the nature, that's the reality of the business, you know?
It's the corporate.
It's
Corporate
yeah.
size.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you think it can be saved?
So, I'm going to be positive before I'm negative. Last week, we had a whole episode, or at least the first hour of an episode or so, talking about a show that was saved essentially twice, and that was the Clone Wars. And when the Clone Wars was announced that it was going to come back for an official ending, they announced that, I believe, in 2018. The hashtag that they put on the trailer was hashtag Clone Wars saved. Because after it was canceled both times initially in 2013 and then, quote unquote canceled after they put out all the episodes they had finished on Netflix, hashtag Save the Clone Wars was going everywhere. So then to literally put forward in your media promoting your product hashtag saved, I'm going to say yes, it is possible.
Yeah.
However, I think in this instance, and with everything we've talked about, with the track record of the way Lucasfilm has operated since the Disney buyout, I'm going to be harsh, and I'm probably going to say no. I don't think it's coming back. Never lose hope. Rebellions are built on hope, as Rogue One says. But what I think is possible, I'm going to put it on Front Street. I would be very, very surprised if eventually the Acolyte Season 2 comes out.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if some, or even potentially all of these characters start to, over time, they appear in other publishing, comic books, video games, novels. But I think it's going to be a while. I think it's going to be a long time, in particular before we see May and Osha. Not to say that I didn't like them, but I think a lot, because they are the main characters, there is a lot of baggage attached to those characters, just with the nature of, as soon as they appear, people will say, I thought the Acolyte was canceled. You know what I mean? But that's my thoughts on whether or not it can be saved. Back to you, dude.
Yeah, like you said, rebellions are built on hope. I think if enough people, say, hey, I want to put my money behind this, like I will subscribe for Disney Plus, or, enough people, say, like even the Zack Snyder movies have gotten light from fans, like if it,
yeah,
like it's possible. I think it's definitely possible. I think it could happen. There is a way to request a season 2 of Acolyte on Disney Plus. I think I have it up real quick just in case people are interested. If you go to help.disneyplus.com, you can scroll down to send feedback and then select request a series in the drop down, and then you can type in the Acolyte season 2. That will help. There's a petition right now that has just reached, as of an hour ago, 40,000 signatures to renew the Acolyte. So there is interest, there is want, there is love for the show that maybe they're not seeing through the numbers. And I think it can be. I definitely think it can be. I want to hold out hope that it can be. I do agree that more likely it's going to be a book or a comic or... I think a video game would be sick. You brought that up. I was like, yeah, I want like a Stranger or Osha May video game where you like go back and forth in between the characters, which would be really cool, almost like Assassin's Creed Syndicate was.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I think that'd be sick. Or as they say in the in the Star Wars universe, I think that'd be totally Wizard. But, Disney doesn't like to renew things that it's canceled, it seems, I mean, we both listened to another podcast that has a whole thing about Save Solo, and they've been popping that off for years, Yeah. So we'll see. I think it can be, but I think it's also a very big hill to climb.
Yeah.
Well, with so many cliffhangers, how do you think they're going to resolve it? We have Darth Plagueis in the cave. We know that he is his apprentice. We know that May and Osha are a dyad and are made of the Force, and like there's so many cliffhangers. You know, we know that Yoda is going to get involved somehow. We know that Venestra is fighting the Senate. You know, there's so much just left open wide. How do you think we can resolve all that?
Well, to be kind of mean, I think the way we could resolve that, not mean to you, but mean to the show, the way you could resolve it is not have cliffhangers at the end of your season, especially if you have not been guaranteed a season 2. But there's a major caveat there. Ahsoka season 1 ended with no ending really in sight. I was watching it going, are you serious? This is nothing, like, Ezra's back. Spoilers for Ahsoka, I guess.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know. Ezra's back. Outside of that,
and Thrawn's in our universe, you know?
Yeah. Nothing was resolved at the end of that season. It ended with a montage of setups for the future. So I do think it is possible that Disney Plus has a mandate to tease more stories.
I think that might be true too, because if I remember correctly, the Willow TV series also set up a little something at the end and then was canceled.
That you read my mind. That was something that I was going to bring up. That not only was Willow similarly not renewed, they took Willow off Disney Plus. It is gone.
Which also insane, because that was one of the series that they were like, hey, Disney Plus, it's this cool thing. Also, we're bringing back Willow. You remember that show? That was so fun.
And I watched Willow. It was fine.
It was fun.
It was solid. I didn't think really much of it. There are people that say it's terrible, and I don't get that. But yeah, not only did they not renew it, we want to talk about not renewing.
And it's really hard to find a DVD of it even.
Oh yeah, it is gone. It is buried. So anyway, but that would be how you resolve all the cliffhangers, is don't have so many cliffhangers. But it is possible that that's a Disney Plus thing, that they want the creators to do that. And I think that's the business, make people want a second season.
Yeah.
So is this a let them cook situation, right? Let the creators actually tell a story and then figure out the business later. Yeah. But I mean, to be fair, we don't know that they're a dyad. That is a common theory.
But we do know they are made of the Force.
That's true, and I really think, gosh. I am truly upset about the Darth Plagueis of it all, because that is a canon story that I have been wanting the canon version of since they wiped Legends. We've got a really good novel about Darth Plagueis that pretty much doesn't work with canon. Yeah, but it doesn't really work with canon in many ways, because it sets up so many EU things. That's what's great about that novel, is that it takes threads that like don't even really matter in the grand scheme of Star Wars and just kind of brings them together into this rich tapestry of this puppet master that was Darth Plagueis, right? And I've been wanting the canon version of the Master of Palpatine since the Disney buyout, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know when we're going to see more of his story or any of his story after he's been tied to a show that, in the corporate sense, failed. Yeah. Everybody loved... Go ahead.
I mean, this would be a wild speculation. Super wild speculation. They didn't do an Acolyte season 2, they do Plagueis and the Stranger.
I mean, it's possible, but I do think... So while I don't think the outcry and the negativity and everything else that you see online, I don't think that's why the show wasn't renewed.
Yeah.
I think it is a factor. So I think that all the negative people would just instantly write it off if it was Acolyte season 2 with a different name, But as to resolve all the cliffhangers, I think most of them are probably never going to be mentioned again, to be perfectly honest. but we will, Kira. Speaking of Solo, she's been in comics, she's been in novels, and it was confirmed. Mild spoilers, but this was in a trailer. She is in Star Wars Outlaws.
Oh, is she really?
Yes, they put that out in the trailer last week. At this point in the timeline, because that game is between Empire Strikes Back and Jedi, at this point in the timeline, she's a pretty big shaker in the criminal underworld. She's in charge of Crimson Dawn. And all that stuff has happened in publishing after Solo. So we might pick up threads. I think it's probably most likely that we're going to see more content for the Stranger.
And we're still waiting on a High Republic video game.
Yeah, that was going to be Star Wars Eclipse. Yeah.
Yeah, they teased it a long time ago. And we got full-on footage. So it's possible.
But that game has been a whole... There's been a lot of controversy. A lot of stuff came out about how if I remember correctly, the guy in charge of the game isn't necessarily the best person. And then they just lost their lead writer officially last week. So I don't know. But yeah, so how to resolve all the cliffhangers, I don't know. Most of it is probably just, the reality is it's probably never going to be mentioned again, or at least not for a good long while. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's more, I don't think it's never going to be mentioned again. I think we're just going to get it in other media. I think it's going to be in comics and in, books, and, I don't think it'll ever go animated, even though I think that'd be really cool. And I think you have some great character design to go animated. But I think it's more likely that it gets, redone in different ways. Even I could see an audio presentation, almost like Audible does with those full cast audio series that they do. I could see it as a book and audio thing, but I don't think it'll go away, because there is a group that loves this show so much. But I do think it's for the main characters, I think it's gonna be a bit, if they don't want to renew it. I think they're gonna give it, some time to breathe, and then be like, hey, you guys remember those fun characters? They're now in a book. Go buy that book. So.
Yeah, it's very likely. I mean, we talked about, they've announced several prequel novels early in Venestra's life, and Indara's in there, and then earlier in Yord and Jeki's one of their adventures. So we already, unless, I don't think they're going to cancel those books. It's possible. But anyway, like you said,
they're already written at this point.
The guy that wrote Shadow of the Sith, I forget his name right now, but he was originally announced as writing a Mandalorian tie-in novel. And he was somewhere in that process, and they were like, hey, never mind, the Mandalorian is changing, and we need to leave that door open, but why don't you write a Luke and Lando novel? And he was like, much better, I'll do that. So these things can change, but anyway.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I think that leads us into our next topic as well, effects on the future of the franchise and Star Wars in general. I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
So, before this show even came out, there was an interview with somebody, I believe it was Bob Iger, where he said they're going to pull back on the quantity of streaming content, and that's for all their IPs, not just Star Wars, and that they're going to try to look for quality over quantity. He said that, in his opinion, part of why the MCU is, I don't want to say going through a down point, but a little bit.
Hey, Deadpool even said it. So.
Exactly. Deadpool himself said it's not a high point, but that they're going to seek quantity over quality. I think that now that I honestly also
quality over quantity.
Did I say the wrong thing?
You said the opposite. Yeah.
Hey, that'll go. That's gonna go in our blooper reel. I'm making one now, coming to TikTok soon. But anyway, I think that the show that could have factored into the show not being renewed. They're like, we're already looking to simplify our content streams, so this is just gonna, now that this is so divisive, great, we're gonna pull the plug. and the just effects on the future, kind of like I said, this is my fear. Now that the first live-action non-Skywalker saga show has, again, in the corporate sense, failed, dog, get ready for 10 more seasons of The Mandalorian. Get ready for Sure Things and what do they call it? AI-faced Luke Skywalker. What's that called? I can't remember.
Deep fake.
Deep. Get ready for. Hey, hey, as long as you write it well. I like all the stuff Luke has done so far, but I would love for an actor to play him. But get ready for sure bets and things that will put butts in seats, and it's gonna be a good long while before we get anything outside of the time period that has been a proven quantity to get people to buy it or people to watch it. I think that's going to be the biggest effect. That's going to be the biggest effect on the future, in my opinion.
I would agree with you. I think it's very sad that this wasn't the hit that it should be for the effects on Star Wars. It was a big swing. It was new era, new ideas, new content, not tied to any movie so far, and I think it was really cool. It's so cool to see that area. So I think it's not, I agree. I think it might be a little bit of, all right, let's go back to what we know works and not take any risks. And I hope that's not true. I really do. But, we'll see. We'll see. I think I really hope that it doesn't lead to that, because I think that will be the detriment, a detriment to Star Wars. Not that The Mandalorian isn't great and Ahsoka isn't great. They're fantastic, but it's like you gotta let it grow more. It's growing pains. They say it all the time, growing pains. Like, you gotta let things try to get bigger and outside of that, core story. But we have comics that have done that and taken big swings too. Like, I think it will still happen. I hope it continues to happen on live action rather than just, books and comics and all that. But yeah, and who knows? I mean, it could lead to them, doing more testing or more, I don't know. I don't know what it will lead to, but I hope it's positive and not negative, and I hope that we don't get deepfake Luke Skywalker. I hope that we get an actor playing Luke Skywalker and not an audio interface to recreate his voice, because every single word, every single line of that episode of The Mandalorian has the same cadence. Go back and watch it. He's like, oh, yes,
sure. No, I know what you're talking about.
Yes. Hello, Ahsoka. It's
sure,
like, but he doesn't have any emotion. He's just one note, because it's a computer recreating the sound of Luke Skywalker. Like, get a good voice actor in there, or get a good actor in there that can do the voice and all that. We have the people to do it.
They did get. Hamill was on set. Hamill did read all the lines. He did. I think there was some of it that they had to fill in. But, I don't know. Color me into the group that was like, oh, my guy is on screen again. Oh, God. And, and it could be entirely possible that part of why almost the exact same cadence was present for that whole episode is it was kind of the same vibe. He was teaching Baby Yoda, and then he was having a very somber conversation with Ahsoka. Am I ever going to see you again? Blah, blah, blah. But, I don't know. I just, like we're saying, we're going to see a lot more, even more of sure things. I'm here for it either way. I don't want this to become crying the podcast.
I feel like this whole bit has been a little down. So.
Yeah. Hey, I'm still. We're in a minute. We're about to talk about all the stuff that we are going to get for sure. Skeleton Crew's right around the corner, and it looks really wholesome. But I think that we're gonna get things that are probably okay. in my opinion, effects on the future, what probably would have made the Acolyte work. Let me back up. What would have made it work for more people, if the Jedi hadn't been morally complicated. If that hadn't happened, I guarantee you, people would be fine. But you talk about Lucasfilm and Disney wanting to distance themselves from things that people don't necessarily like. Going back to The Force Awakens, dude, the press tour was all about practical effects, which was them going, it's not like the prequels. It's not going to look like a video game. Come back, everybody. It's just like it was in the 70s and 80s, even though I think there were more CGI effects in Force Awakens than there were in The Phantom Menace, but that's a whole other thing. But the press was about, come back. It's what we know you like. So it's going to be, it's what we know you like. Here's Jedi being heroes. As well they are. But there's not going to be the complicated moral grayness stuff. Oftentimes fans don't like being challenged. And I am not trying, again, please don't, people listen to what we're saying. Don't project onto what we're saying. Neither Zach nor I thought the show was perfect. We did not. I had my problems. I still do have my problems. There were things that I'd love to change. But I thought it was pretty close to Ahsoka in terms of quality. Yeah. And Ahsoka's getting a second season. But like we've said to death, at the end of the day, it comes down to the numbers and effects on the future. I think we're going to get sure, safe bets.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we've kind of covered the whole Acolyte of it all. Hashtag renew the Acolyte, hashtag save the Acolyte. Let's see what happens. So let's get into our next point, Matt.
Yeah. So to talk about something else that we might not get, Temuera Morrison was at a convention somewhere, and if I was a good journalist, I would have figured out where the convention was, but I did not. But he was asked if he was going to be in the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, and he basically said no. And the prevailing quote was, this show's reception, talking about Book of Boba Fett, this show's reception does seem to have impacted the future of the character in the franchise. So, Zach, what are your thoughts on Temuera Morrison saying that?
I don't think it's the last we're going to see of Boba Fett. He's a cool character. And talk about a show with problems. That show has problems, too. And people are like, oh, that show deserves a second season more than The Acolyte. There's, a whole middle section of that show that's like, all right, cool. What are we going to do now? Oh, next episode. Cool. Oh, next episode. Oh, last episode. Cool. It has the very similar pacing problems, probably would have been better as a movie, if I'm going to be honest with that show. But I don't think it's the end. I don't think the show's reception is impacting the future of the character. I really don't. I think it was probably he's being a mob boss on Tatooine. So if we're not doing Tatooine stuff in this movie, then there's no need to bring him in. I think it's more likely you bring in Black Chrysanthemum, because he's probably his enforcer, but it's the whole show was about him creating his place where he rules, and he did that. And so if we want him again, I think it's got to be Tatooine related, or he's being a big mob boss. He's being the Darth Maul and Solo. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. The harshness of his quote kind of freaked me out. The show's reception does seem to have impacted the future of the character in the franchise. Because what that tells me is that he's not hearing anything from anybody about when he's coming back or if he's coming back. Again, we've said it to death today, but that when something isn't received super well, necessarily, Disney will kind of bury it to focus your eyeballs on things that they think you do like or they think you will like, not what the public has already shown that they didn't really like. Yeah. And we can say to death that at the end of the day, if the writing is better, we will like it more. But that is such a subjective thing that a corporation is going to go off of Like, if they have proved that they did not like the Book of Boba Fett show, it is going to be a bit before you see Boba Fett in his armor. Just because the corporate way is that there's baggage attached now to the character. Yeah. Now, I also agree with exactly what you said. In a way, I kind of like that he's not necessarily going to be in the movie, because I would like a story focused on Mando and Grogu. I don't think Season 3 of The Mandalorian was particularly awesome. I thought it was fine, but I did think it was kind of clunky, and there's all kinds of theories that I have some of as well, that I think it's because it was kind of a late realization that Pedro wasn't going to be able to be on set at all. So they had to make the story about Bo-Katan. They had to make the story about Mandos in general, but then they ended that season wrapping it up with Mando and Grogu sitting on the porch getting ready for new adventures with themselves. They have closed the book on all the other stuff. Let's get back to the Mandalorian and Grogu. Yeah. And so I quite like that. I'm hoping that this means this movie is just about them. We'll see our boy Boba again. That guy has way too much fan love.
I think it's more likely that you just see him in the armor and not see Temuera Morrison in it. You know, like, he's a character
definitely possible.
He's a character that we didn't know what he looked like when he first appeared. You know, like, he could just be in the armor. Like, you just need a stunt guy sometimes. You know, like, a wonderful stunt actor to do badass things and then fly off, you know?
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I'm sitting here making this big grandiose thing about Disney burying Boba Fett. It could just be that they haven't called Tim Morrison because whatever stunt guy is going to be in a cameo in the movie in the armor. That's a really good point.
And then they call him at the end and they're like, hey, we need you to do ADR on this character. You know, like...
And he's like, oh, what? Yay. Good. Cool. That's a really good point.
Because I love Tim. I really do. I love his work. But he's old. He's getting very old, you know, like, and yes, he did great in Boba Fett, like, and he's got it, but, like, he's only getting older, you know, like.
I kind of like the Clint Eastwood of it all, the aged Boba Fett, the, aging gunslinger. But yeah, anyway, yeah. But so we've talked to death for about 48 minutes or so as to things that aren't going to happen. Let's pivot hard for a little bit and talk about something that will happen.
Yay! Skeleton Crew! Woo! Jude Law! Yeah! It's gonna save Star Wars!
It made it better.
So we got a little bit of news about Skeleton Crew. Jude Law sat down with an interview for Rotten Tomatoes, and man, does he just look like a happy guy. He looks so just like happy about this thing. One point in the thing, in the interview, she asks him, he's like, is it true that you just couldn't stop smiling on set? And he goes, is that what people said about me? That I'm only always smiling? Well, probably. So, what are your thoughts on the interview, Matt? What do you think?
Well, to be shamelessly self-interested, I think that my speculation about him turning into Captain Hook might be correct.
Yes.
Because they asked him about his character, and he said Jod Nanawood is the name.
He just said
right?
Jod. He's like, his name's John.
Yeah. And he gets this twinkle in his eye, because I think even he's aware that Jod Nanawood is a stupid name. But he said Jod is one of his names. Mm-hmm. And then he says you never quite know if he's trustworthy, if he's not trustworthy, what side he's on. You never quite know. But ultimately, he's a member of the crew, and he's full of contradictions. So,
which is what you want from a character, you know?
Especially a character that I think is going to turn out to be the secret pirate captain of the ship that they find. And that he's going to be the villain that the kids have to overcome. But I like that he says you never quite know which way. This sounds like Jack Sparrow in Star Wars. Yeah. The other Jack Sparrow connection, this is dip into something else. But in the trailer... because as of right now, it also appears that Jod is force sensitive. Right? The first time you see him, he's reaching out his hand and he's force pulling a key to his hand. I talk about Jack Sparrow connection. That takes me back to Pirates of the Caribbean. The pirates reaching for the key to the cell from within the cell. And so are we going to get the Star Wars version of that? We're going to tip our hat to Disney. And this is going to be the Star Wars Jack Sparrow.
Yeah. Another thing to lead to your speculation on him being Captain Hook is that David Lowery is one of the directors on one of the episodes, and he directed Peter Pan, which also had him in it. Like, he's
Dude.
like, yeah, I worked with David Lowery on Peter Pan. He's just wonderful. Like, you have that same director, like, and of course you're like, oh, if he is Hook, let's get somebody who did Hook. Let's bring him in. So.
I'm saying this sounds legit. All right, I'll quit trying to beat my chest like I'm, inventing something. But yeah. I do think that's the way it's going to
go. They talk a little bit about all of the directors of the franchise, and they bring back Bryce Dallas Howard, who seems to be just like a great, stepping into her dad's shoes, just like fully on taking on these great directing roles. And he said that when she's there, it's like a big warm embrace, which means that she creates, to me, that says like, oh, when she's on set, culture and like the vibe of that episode is just like good fun working conditions. Let's make some great Star Wars. So happy to see her back. He also mentions a lot of Easter eggs in the show. Apparently it's full of Easter eggs, which at the time it's set, of course it's set. But yeah, great interview if you want to see it on Rotten Tomatoes. Any other things you want to talk about the interview?
Well, just the Easter eggs. It's interesting because we didn't talk about it when we broke down his People magazine interview a couple weeks ago, but the title of the interview was like, Jude Law promises Easter eggs in Star Wars. And I was like, why are we talking about Easter eggs so much? And then here we are bringing it up again. Why are they pushing Easter eggs? I think it just goes to, it might be what we've been talking about. Somebody was like, hey, talk about how this is familiar. Talk about how it's fan service. Let's get more eyeballs on this show, please. I think it's just as simple as that. And so they're just running with it because when they ask him, they're like, hey, and apparently there's lots of Easter eggs. He's like, yes, there are lots of nods to the original films.
So it's set right after them, and it's a set with a kid who's obsessed with Luke Skywalker. Of course, there's Easter eggs.
Yes. That's
also it's Star Wars. It's all Easter eggs.
Well, and this is a whole other conversation, but the good fan service and bad fan service, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, what most people would say is good fan service is when it works and when they like it. But if a universe that has had lots of media over many years is showing, if there's a new entry into that universe and it is showing that it is part of the same universe, that's not fan service, that's not Easter eggs, that's consistency. You know what I mean? That's not special. If it's showing you new parts of the universe and how it fits in, obviously that's breaking new ground. We talk about suburbs in Star Wars on this show. But it's entirely possible that when we do our weekly breakdown of the episodes as they come out, that we're going to eventually be going, did you see anything that counts as an Easter egg, or were you just watching a Star Wars show? Yeah. If a lightsaber shows up, I don't think that's an Easter egg. I think that's just, Anyway, but that's all I got to say about that.
Nice. Well, I think that brings us into our next segment. You want to start us off, Matt?
I am very excited about this. So this was an idea that I had to do eventually on the podcast, and then it's a way to keep this episode fun and light in light of the quote-unquote cancellation of the Acolyte. I want us to give you our top 5 canceled Star Wars projects that we want to see. And I guess to clarify, this isn't necessarily that I want them to come back or that we want them to come back. It's just things that like, ooh, I wish that could have happened. Yeah. I really like things that we've heard that would have been cool to take place. But I've got 5. Zach's got 5. We might have some of the same ones.
We might. But, I kind of kept mine to like official canceled, not necessarily things we haven't heard about, but that's me. I also might change that a little bit now that I'm thinking about it.
That's fine. That's fine. Mine is kind of both. Officially canceled / things that, like, I guess mine could say Star Wars projects that never happened because they have all been, everything that I'm about to say has been talked about, has been said that it was the plan at some point or that it almost was the plan. And I'm always like, ooh, that's cool. And so I've got my top 5 ranked, like, all the way 5 to 1, that one
Same.
being like the most that like I wish this had happened. So, okay, Zach, do you want to hit us with your number 5?
My number 5 is a little spicy. It's the Colin Trevorrow episode 9.
Ooh, okay, break it down.
I mean, we've kind of seen the script a little bit. It's been leaked. I think reading of that one day for the pod would be really cool. Although so many people have like broken it down and done like storyboarding and all that. But maybe we'll do our version. It's his original plan for episode 9 and the script that we would have got. And I like Rise of Skywalker, but like the Trevorrow script did feel new. Like it didn't feel like a replay of another movie that we've already seen, or 2 movies that we've already seen. So I think I don't know. I just want to see it, and I think some of the things it does with the characters is really fun and unique. And I think it would have been a big swing. And I think after Last Jedi, they're like, oh, no swings, no more swings. We got to do a sure thing, Also, his other movie tanked so hard that they were like, oh no, maybe not. But yeah, no, I think the episode 9 Colin Trevorrow would have been fun and would have been cool, and I would have something I would love to see as like a Legends or like a What If they do like a Star Wars What If version of the Marvel What If. I think that would be a really cool thing to see.
That's I would love a Star Wars What If. I don't know. I don't know that we will ever see something like that because one of the biggest selling points of this franchise is that everything's canon, right? So,
but we got
think
we got the anime
Visions
series Visions, and that's not canon.
Yes, but I also think that with the Star Wars fan culture, with many elements of it being so outspoken when they don't like something, I could understand Disney being cautious about spending a bunch of money on a show that would ultimately result in a lot of people online saying, "This is what you should have made. Why didn't you make this? See, why didn't you just do that?"
I didn't think about that.
But Star Wars What If does exist in some fashion. You can look up the Star Wars Infinity comic books from back in the days.
Super fun.
They're so fun. I would love to see Star Wars Infinities for the prequels. And Lucasfilm, get me to write it. I've got all my ideas. But yeah, so the Colin Trevorrow script, and I have a copy of the script that Zach is talking about. It sounds like I got one from Colin. I did not. You can find it online. And the script that we're talking about, it's important to mention that was the first major draft. There was a second draft that has not been leaked online that is, in my opinion, way less interesting. They had to take out a lot of stuff. But we're gonna talk about these things.
Yeah.
So the biggest reason that I am happy that we got The Rise of Skywalker and not Duel of the Fates, which was the name of the Colin Trevorrow script, is that what solves Star Wars at the end of Duel of the Fates is that Rey becomes a gray Jedi. She is using equal parts. She embraces the dark side and the light side, and then they double down on that being the solution to this franchise by the Force ghosts of Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Luke telling Rey that she taught them how the Force works. And I was like, no thanks. Kindly do not take my money. We'll have a whole Grey Jedi episode eventually. I keep threatening this. But to get all philosophical and grumpy, for that reason alone, I will take The Rise of Skywalker over Duel of the Fates. And it should mention, I think the Grey Jedi-ness of it all went away in the second draft. I think you can look up the concept art and you can kind of hear, or basically people are able to.
The battle on Coruscant would have been sick.
Basically everything else in the original Duel of the Fates script, I think, is pretty sick. There's some dumb things like Hux's arc becomes that he's mad he can't use the Force. It just makes him kind of even more sad and pitiful.
Yeah.
but there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in that script.
Mm-hmm.
And like Zach said, we are actors. We have a lot of actor friends. Maybe one day I wouldn't be opposed to doing a audio drama of
Yeah.
the Duel of the Fates
If we
script. That might be
can,
kind
we'd
of
have
fun.
to look into the legalese.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
You can find there's people have made like a motion comic online and stuff. But we'll see. I don't want to get Lucasfilm mad at us. We want to have this podcast for a long time. But anyway.
All right, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is if that the Clone Wars had not initially gotten canceled in 2013.
Okay.
Because now all of the arcs that I'm about to mention, we want to talk about things coming back. Like, so if you don't know, Clone Wars was canceled in 2013 at the end of season 5. So Ahsoka leaving the Jedi, that was the last thing that was aired on Cartoon Network. And then almost a year later, they came out with a whole other season released on Netflix of episodes that were done at the time it was canceled. Mm-hmm. And then eventually it has come out, while we did, of course, get one more season after that in 2021, I believe, which was, of course, the Bad Batch arc, the Ahsoka and the Twins arc, mm-hmm. and then the Siege of Mandalore, which the Siege of Mandalore is the best ending the Clone Wars could have ever had, and one of my favorite Star Wars movies ever. I think of those 4 episodes as a movie.
Yeah.
But here's arcs that came out in other storytelling mediums. The Son of Dathomir, Darth Maul.
Great.
I would have loved to see that as episodes.
Yeah.
The comic run is fantastic, but those 4 episodes, some of the most fun villains fighting villains in any storytelling I've ever seen in any franchise.
Yeah.
But Son of Dathomir, Dark Disciple, ended up becoming a great novel.
Book. Yeah.
It would have been great episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then now things that didn't happen. The Crystal Crisis arc, which is Obi-Wan and Anakin it's a murder mystery on Utapau, and they eventually find out that the Separatists are stealing and kind of hoarding giant kyber crystals. The idea is it was them getting this close to finding out that they're working on the Death Star.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan don't find out about the Death Star, but they've said that it was going to be something that was going to inform Star Wars Episode 4, where Obi-Wan is looking at the Death Star and goes, "That's no moon. That's a space station." Right? That he's putting it together like, oh my God, they built it. Like, they did it. Oh my, I didn't think they were ever going to get it done. I really would have. You can see that. You can find that online as story reels, which is basically unfinished animation, right? But there's also a great moment in that arc of Obi-Wan and Anakin kind of sitting out by the campfire and talking about how Anakin hasn't made peace with Ahsoka leaving the Jedi and how it's a problem. And Obi-Wan's like, you've got to let her go. She's already gone, man. But 2 other things that we didn't see that we got kind of repurposed in other stories. There was going to be an arc with Yoda and the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, on the Wookiee planet. We saw some of that basically condensed into an episode on the Bad Batch, season 2, I believe, where you got Gunji, that Padawan's return, and they saw him fighting some spider-like creatures. All of that. They weren't very spidery though, so I was okay. They were going to do a whole arc about that, and it was going to inform Yoda's line in episode 3, "Good relations with the Wookiees I have. I'll spare you my Yoda impression." And the last one, two more. Ahsoka holding off Palpatine within the Sith Temple beneath the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. That was going to be a moment that was going to happen in an arc of Ahsoka after she had left the Jedi, kind of getting back involved. They were going to show something that George kind of told Dave Filoni very casually, that the Jedi Temple was built on top of a Sith Temple. And that Palpatine was going to be in there trying to get into something. They were never going to come face to face. Filoni has there's a panel from, I think, Star Wars Celebration Europe that you can find online called The Untold Clone Wars. And a lot of this comes from that panel where Dave is talking about things they were gonna do. And now that they'll never happen, he'll tell you about it. But there was going to be a moment of Ahsoka holding off, like keeping this door closed, essentially, that Palpatine was trying to get through. She didn't know who it was, but she could feel there was great darkness trying to get inside. I think they kind of repurposed that moment in Rebels, which was Ahsoka and Ezra trying to keep Palpatine out of the world between worlds.
Yes.
But then the last thing, and the thing that I am most upset didn't happen. There was going to be a really, really cool arc of Cad Bane training up a young Boba Fett.
Mm.
By the end of the arc, Boba was going to have on the armor that we know Boba Fett to have in the original trilogy. Cad Bane would have trained him. They were going to hunt sand people at one point. And then it was going to culminate in Cad Bane and Boba having a Western face-off. Just staring each other down, tumbleweeds going by, and, quick draw, right? Because the whole thing was Cad Bane never got to test himself against Jango, but he's got the next best thing, a direct clone who's just as good. And there is a story reel that exists of that face-off, but this isn't canon, because we haven't, what you were going to see was the wide shot of they both draw at the same time, they both shoot each other, they both go down, and that's how Boba gets the dent in his helmet. And it's interesting because if you had seen, and I want that story to exist somewhere.
Yeah.
Because it informs Book of Boba Fett.
Oh, hugely.
Because Book of Boba Fett, unless I'm mistaken, is the first time we have seen Cad Bane and Boba interact. And Cad Bane's like, I'm still faster than you, blah, blah. And they have all this animosity that if you don't know about this story that never officially happened, you can put together that they know each other and they don't like each other. But I think it could have been a really cool moment. Yeah. I would love a Book of Boba Fett Season 2, as bad as that show was, do like a Godfather Part 2 type thing.
Yeah.
Where half of it is Tim Morrison and then the other half is Daniel Logan as young Boba Fett. And you can have that moment, have it culminate in a live-action bourbon. A live-action bourbon?
Ah, my live-action bourbon.
Put it on the blooper reel. A live-action version of the Boba Fett Cad Bane standoff. I just think that would have been a really fun, very Star Wars-y arc. So that's my number 5, the rest of the original Clone Wars.
You also missed that Ahsoka got a boyfriend in that arc, one of those arcs.
Well, and that, I think, got changed to be Trace and Rafa.
It did.
Yeah. But yeah, Ahsoka having a boyfriend that wasn't Lux Bonteri.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my number 4 is Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron. Because,
yes.
I mean, they teased so hard. They had her skating on the tarmac in the jumper suit with the helmet. She talks about how her dad was a fighter pilot and like how much this meant to her. And man, I was so hyped for that movie. Just because there seemed to be so much heart in it. We don't even know what it was going to be about. We have very little information about it. But I knew it was Patty Jenkins, who I adore her directing. We knew that it meant a lot to her. And we knew that it was going to be Rogue, Rebellion, original trilogy, fighter pilot problems. I'm picturing like Alphabet Squadron, but like real life, like live action. And man, I was psyched for that movie. And it's just fallen by the wayside. Even though we got a like full on, here is Patty Jenkins on like next to actual fighter pilot jets. Like they did us dirty. They did us dirty with that one.
I have all of the same thoughts, and that's why Rogue Squadron is my number 3. So I'm gonna hold on to him.
Okay, well, what's your number 4?
So this is my cheating, because this was never announced, and this is one of those moments where it's like, what could have been, man? What could have been? So in 2011, in the press tour for Captain America: The First Avenger, the director of that movie, a fella named Joe Johnston, revealed that he wanted to make a Boba Fett movie. Now, Joe Johnston, for those that don't know, has been a director for a long time. He directed Jumanji. He directed The Rocketeer, Captain America: The First Avenger. He also, one of his earliest jobs, he was one of the original concept artists for the Star Wars original trilogy.
Oh, really?
And I'm pretty sure
yes,
he was one of the main architects of the look of Boba Fett. And so to get that guy who has a long track record of fun, just good adventure movies that are earnest and straightforward, oh my gosh, do I want to see the guy that created Boba Fett's look get to make a Western Boba Fett movie. Like, he's probably, they'll probably think he's too old now, so I don't think this will happen. And the character has changed so much, right?
Yeah.
But how cool. That just would have been just such fun, you know? I mean, it was at a time where George really didn't want to make any more Star Wars, so it's probably part of why he said no. But what were you going to say?
Joe Johnston is also excellent at actual Easter eggs. In
Yeah.
Captain America: The First Avenger, he pulls out the Red Skull pulls out the Tesseract, and he's like, what does he say? He's like, Hitler is the Führer is wasting away in Africa while I. Or he's searching for trinkets in the sand, but it's like, hey, that's Indiana Jones. Like,
Yes, yes. And the Führer searches for trinkets in the desert.
Yes.
And he's trying to say this is happening at the same time as Indiana Jones and
Yeah.
and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great director.
Yeah. I really, really would have liked to see that movie. I just think that would have been so fun.
Mm-hmm.
But, and we talk about all these things getting repurposed. Somebody get Joe Johnston to give y'all his loose ideas on what the story would have been and make it a comic book.
Oh, it would, yeah.
I would buy that right now. Like, take my money. Take my money now. But anyway, that's my thoughts. That's my number 4, a Joe Johnston Boba Fett movie.
Well, my number 3, speaking of movies that were kind of like thought of, but not really. At one point, I think it was 2012, 13, whatever, Benicio del Toro mentioned that he wanted to do a Jabba the Hutt Rise and Fall film and talk about the monster master getting to do Star Wars.
Oh my gosh.
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, not Benicio. Yeah.
Sorry, did I say Benicio? Yeah. Never mind. Guillermo del Toro. Yeah. Not Benicio and his weird clicks in Last Jedi. Sorry, Guillermo del Toro getting the creature master to do this. I can just imagine it now, like, because you know that Jabba would be grotesque and amazing, and like all of the like different aliens in that movie would have been so good, and it could still happen. He's still around. He's still directing. He's still doing great stuff. Make it happen, Disney. Make it happen.
Yeah, like
And
I think part of why
he's an Oscar winner. Like he is. If we're talking about going back to sure bet things, people show up for Del Toro movies. They do. It will become a cult classic, not just for Star Wars, but for Del Toro fans and monster movie fans. Like give that man money, and just let him go.
Well, and that's a possibility, like, if Disney pivots away from streaming and goes back to movies for a bit, that is a real possibility. And I mean, my mind jumps to Book of Boba Fett. They don't say that Jabba only had a rancor. Fennec says that, like, at this point, Jabba would have fed you to his menagerie, which implies he had a lot of monsters. Can you imagine, like you've been saying, if Guillermo del Toro gets to create Star Wars monsters, like a whole zoo of Star Wars monsters, that, like, I want that now. I just take all of my money. Take it. Just make that show, make that movie, make that show. Get him to come in and, like, consult on a Jabba the Hutt TV show. It would be awesome.
Yeah. I think it'd be better as a movie just because Jabba to animate and like to puppet and like that's a lot of work.
Yeah. He'd probably have to be CG on a TV show. But yeah.
Yeah, that's my number 3. So we teased your number 3. What is you want to talk about Rogue Squadron?
Rogue Squadron. You want to talk about how I am in the bag for this, just like Zach is. Star Wars has some of my favorite things. The Force is number 1. Dude, pilots are number 2. I wanted to be a pilot when I was a kid, and then I found out, you need to be able to see. And I, in fact, am quite blind without my contacts or glasses. And so I gave up that dream. One of the reasons was probably Independence Day, which, as silly as a 90s popcorn movie as that is, it hit when I was 7, which was the perfect age. But the other one was Star Wars, was Luke Skywalker making the trench run. I've got a yellow bomber jacket that says, like, Rebel Squadron and stuff, and it would be such a good movie. I think. I don't know how you could miss. You, of course, could, but give me Top Gun and Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately why I really think this movie didn't happen.
Oh, because Top
Because
Gun did
I
so well.
think I think the Top Gun sequel came out, and when you watch that movie is Tom Cruise making the trench run.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And I'm not trying to diminish it because I had a lot of fun in that movie. I don't like Tom Cruise. I think he's kind of crazy. I will never not appreciate his just complete willingness to do all the stunts and give you that experience. I think he's a crazy person, and neither here nor there. But hashtag Tom Cruise, don't cancel this podcast. but I think that when that movie was young pilots doing piloty things in a Star Warsy way, and it was everywhere, I think Disney went, well, crap, man, that's what we were gonna do. There are people that think that Wonder Woman 2 came out, wasn't very well received, and so Disney shelved it. I don't buy that. I think that it was the age-old creative differences, and then, you know, in my chaos theory, Top Gun came out, crushed. They put it away. But you want to talk about having so much to pull from. The Rogue Squadron novels from the old expanded universe are great. They are so good. They're not just the, you know, World War II, we're going to shoot the bad guy aces down and we're going to go to work. It is political. Rogue Squadron is a political weapon that people wield to try and get things. And it's Wedge Antilles featured in a way he never was before. I will say, I don't think it was necessarily going to be original trilogy, because the promo art that they put out was a sequel era X-Wing. Now that could mean, yeah, exactly. But you knew they were going to be in orange. They were going to do the thing, right? They were going to wear the orange flight suits. But it could have been between the originals and the sequels. It could have been post-sequels. It could have had, I'm forgetting, Dennis Lawson come back as Wedge, like he did in Rise of Skywalker. Or you could have had Oscar Isaacs come back.
Oh, that would have been cool
And play,
too.
you know, Admiral Poe Dameron, training up the next era of pilots.
Yeah.
But I do think, I really do think it was going to follow the Top Gun Maverick plot line, that it was, because it's pretty straightforward. The young pilots trained by a guy that we know to go on a mission, and then they, you know, succeed on the mission, they become better pilot. They become the Rogue Squadron. So, yeah, we've talked about it twice now.
Yeah.
But Rogue Squadron, Patty Jenkins, and these things could come back, because that was never officially put away. It's just, I think I saw something that's like, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
It wasn't a Lucasfilm thing. It was a Patty Jenkins thing. Yeah. But, you know, it is what it is. So, Zach, what's your number 2?
Well, my number 2 is Solo 2.
There you go.
I want to see a second Solo film. My background for my computer is literally concept art from the original movie of them playing sabacc, because the concept art for that film is gorgeous as art pieces on themselves. But yeah, no, I mean, I liked what they did with it. I want to see Han Solo versus Darth Maul Syndicate. Like, I just want more Darth Maul. 2, you know, Han and Chewie and Kira. I mean, like, we get more Kira in the comics now, but like, Kira was such an interesting character for her turn, and to like really screw him over at the end, and it's just like they set up just enough. That is a movie that finishes with enough things set up for a second movie, but also feels complete as its own. So take notes, Star Wars. But I want it. I want Solo 2. I want more Lando. I want more, you know, I like Alden Ehrenreich. I thought he did a good job. I thought he was, you know, great. I thought he was, you know, perfect for a young Han Solo. Did the movie have problems? Yeah, because all Star Wars has problems. What's your name? I don't have a last name. Solo. Dumb. But overall, I really love that movie. It's a good time. Every time I rewatch it, I actually rewatch that movie more than some of the other Star Wars, because I'm like, cool, I just want to have a good time. I don't want to have to pay attention too hard, and I want to have, you know, like, I don't want to have to, like, want to watch another movie. So yeah, that's me. Solo 2.
Yeah, I love that. I love that movie. I mean, I think what killed that movie was number one, it was the first time a Star Wars movie came out within 6 months of another.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that the biggest reason Rogue One did so well, being a departure, the first non-episodic Star Wars film, was that it came out at Christmas and there wasn't a lot of competition. Solo came out at the same time as Infinity War, which was stupid.
A cultural event.
The same company funded Marvel Studios, and Marvel Studios built to Infinity War for 10 years. That was a massive oversight. And it was, I'm going to say it was dumb on Disney's part to release that at the same time. Because just as, like, the normal people in your life, what are they going to do and what did they do? It's like, okay, the normal people that aren't like us, that they just watch the movies for fun, you know, somebody wants to go see something kind of fun and nerdy this weekend. Are they going to go see the Marvel movie that's been building to for 10 years and they've got like 15 characters in it that they like? Or are they going to go see the Han Solo movie that doesn't have Harrison Ford?
Yeah.
It's not even a discussion. They're going to go see Infinity War.
Yeah.
And Deadpool 2 came out at the same time. And there were a couple other big genre movies that hit at the same moment. And then when you made Solo twice, because they were over halfway through shooting it with Lord and Miller, canned them, brought in Ron Howard to right the ship or whatever. We will never know what actually took place.
Yeah.
You made your movie twice. It is not going to do well financially. It had to be a super hit. Yeah, it had to be a super hit to do well. But yeah, what John Kasdan has said, I've alluded to it, was that it was going to be a movie or a couple movies about a war in the crime syndicates, where Darth Maul was going to be fighting to take over. We still don't know what gets him out of the head of Crimson Dawn and stranded on Malachor on Star Wars Rebels. We still don't know that story. We've seen Kira show up in public.
Hard.
Yeah, at some point, and I want to know how that happens. We see Kira show up in publishing between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi in kind of the canon version of Shadows of the Empire. And we've seen Maul and Kira show up in, I think it's called Crimson Climb, which is a young adult novel about Kira that I haven't read, but I know a lot of what happens. One of the things in it is that at that point, Maul isn't in charge of Crimson Dawn. He's in charge of all of the crime syndicates, as he's basically Emperor Palpatine of the criminal underworld.
Which they set up in that Clone Wars arc that became a comic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Son of Dathomir, and then you can see him a couple times in one of the Clone Wars season 7 things. You can see him meeting with all of the crime leaders, including Dryden Voss from Solo. That he has become the Palpatine of the underworld. I would like to see that story. I don't think you're going to be able to get Alden for a Disney Plus show, but I would love to live in a universe where that was possible. With this whole podcast, this whole episode is about things getting canceled and not returning. And I talk about how I think it's easier for Disney to sign off on showing side characters from a project that didn't necessarily land and not the main guy. We have not seen Han Solo on screen again. You could also say there hasn't been a reason, right? And that's perfectly fine. But we've seen Han Solo in Chewie comics, but he has not shown up. Anywho.
Yeah.
So Solo 2.
That's my number 2. What's your 2?
And my number 2 is in the exact same vibe of the Star Wars universe, the Underworld. My number 2 is Star Wars Underworld, which was the live-action show. Yeah, it was the live-action show that George Lucas was working on.
Yeah.
It was announced sometime in, I think, like 2005, when somewhere around Episode 3 coming out. It was the first time it was talked about. Where George was like, we're done with movies. We're going to move to TV. We're going to make Clone Wars for animation and the Star Wars Underworld show. And it was going to be, from everything we know about it, it was going to be very, very similar to Clone Wars in that it was kind of an anthology show, but set purely within the criminal underworld between Episode 3 and Episode 4. We know this has come out. 50 hours of this show were written, pen to paper, done. One of the main writers was Ronald D. Moore, who was one of the main creative heads from the golden age of Star Trek, all the shows in the 90s, and then a lot of the movies. He also was behind the Battlestar Galactica reboot. Right now he writes for All Mankind. There was an interview that came out where he was arguing, where he said it was funny, where I found myself arguing with George Lucas as to what Darth Vader would say in this moment, which tells us Darth Vader was going to be on the show. We know that it was going to be the origin of Boba Fett. Daniel Logan was confirmed to be on the show. We know that Rogue One, that whole story, came from a story treatment pitch that, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget his name. The guy that invented Photoshop, and he's been one of the Lucasfilm, one of the Industrial Light and Magic heads for John Knoll. That's his name. I got it. I pulled it out of the archive. The story for Rogue One was a pitch that John Knoll made for an Underworld episode as to how the rebels stole the plans and what happened to those people that stole the Death Star plans. I love Clone Wars. I love that it is a Star Wars buffet. Every couple episodes, here's something completely different. You didn't like that? Here's something different. This was going to be that in live action.
Yeah. And
it was going to be, again, George Lucas, the idea man, other people executing it. And if it is true, what I have heard and what we believe to be true, that they have said, if there are 50 hours written somewhere, good Lord, what are you doing? Make it.
Yeah.
Make it. What are you waiting on, man? Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I agree. That almost made my list. That and Star Wars 1313, which was a video game, also said in the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think it would... Man, have you watched the previs of the first episode?
There's a whole first episode
you
previs?
Can find, I think it's the first 10 or 15 minutes. They did a previs for it.
I did not know
with
this.
Some very cheap CGI, but man, it was instantly you're like, I want to watch the show. It looked really cool, and just to explore that, and the same with Star Wars 1313, that almost made my list. It was all about the criminal Coruscant underworld. That is a thing that we keep on getting teased that we don't get to see, and I'm like, why do you keep on teasing me? Just give it. You're like, hey, we're gonna announce this really cool video game. Nope. Hey, we're gonna do this really cool TV show. Also no. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff you can do down there, already written. Give it to me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think now that I remember, I did see something about the previs. I think it was something where it was, I doubted whether or not it was legit.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do remember that one of the reasons the show didn't happen was George was like, it's just going to cost too much money to do it to the level that he would want on a weekly basis. There was not really the money
Which
to make
is
that
hilarious
happen.
Because now we have Game of Thrones that costs millions of dollars an episode. So
yeah, but at the time, TV
yes.
wasn't that way, man.
Yeah.
All right, so that was my number 2. Zach, what is your number 1? Or do you have an honorable mention before we go to the number 1?
I think 1313 and that was going to be on my honorable mention. My other honorable mention would be was it Shatter or Splinters of the Empire, the original sequel for A New Hope.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Yes, that is my honorable mention because
cool.
I've read a little bit of what I was gonna. I haven't read the book, but I've read the synopsis, and I'm like, that's cool. That's a fun. That's a fun story,
I can tell you I have read the book. It is really weird.
Oh, well, there you go.
The overall is really cool.
Yeah.
But it is a little silly.
Yeah.
For some parts.
But you want to mention your honorable mentions real quick, or?
Yeah. Star Wars Detours.
Oh yes.
This
cartoon.
was the cartoon that Seth Green and the other creatives of Robot Chicken worked on with from George, and that show, if I understand correctly, was done.
Animated, yeah.
Was animated. A couple clips came out. It was getting ready to come out. It was going to be a kind of silly show, kind of poking fun at Star Wars, but produced by George.
Yeah.
And he's talked about how he's like, yeah, they keep trying to go too adult with it, and I keep trying to remind them that it's for kids. The clips that have come out were funny, and people, and then Disney bought Lucasfilm and shelved it.
Yeah.
Now, it is what it is. At the end of the day, I get it. Only now are they kind of letting the Lego people play with kind of poking fun at some of this stuff. But if it's done and it's on some hard drive somewhere, man, I'm sure it's tied up in rights issues now for who produced it and whatever else, and who would want a piece of the pie and so on and so forth. But yeah, I would like to watch a silly Star Wars show. That sounds fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, my number one is the Knights of the Old Republic movie. It has been teased many times throughout the years. I think in the 2010s it was in development. But man, are those games fantastic. And to me, it's a easy win for Disney to do it. Like, you already have the fans of it. You adapt it, and maybe not, and do some fun stuff, because you can't adapt it directly because you were able to choose if you wanted to be good or bad. So, take one of the routes, adapt it fully, and give us that movie. Like, all of the I guess it's animated, but it looks almost live action videos that they made for that game are cinema. I think it might have been for the MMORPG of it, but that whole, like, I know you want to do High Republic, but do Old Republic. Like, do an IP that we already know, like, and just run with it. Run with Bastila, and just like give us that show. Because that, for a lot of people, that was like Star Wars for a good portion of time, because we didn't have a lot of stuff coming out. So I think that's an easy win. I want to see Revan. I want to see all of those different Siths and that story. So that's my number one.
So I think that while I would watch it no matter what. I think that the biggest reason it hasn't happened is there are a lot of problems with adapting the Old Republic to a movie. Not the least of which is that Revan, as a character, is intended to be a blank slate, and that you can make Revan whatever you want. That's why Revan wears a mask. Revan is a self-insert character. He can be a girl, he can be a man, or a lady, or a man, or whatever. He can be whatever you want. He can go good. He can go bad. Everybody is able to claim ownership of the Knights of the Old Republic, because they're able to make that story whatever they want.
Yeah.
Star Wars: The Old Republic is a really fun game that is still going. Everybody says they want Legends back. Star Wars: The Old Republic is Legends, and it's still going today. They have new stories coming out all the time. I mean, it's a deep, free-to-play MMO. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's going to boil down to the same thing, right? You got to grind to level up, and then you got to get together with a bunch of your buddies and go fight the boss, and it's going to be really hard, and it's going to take like an hour. Not to poo-poo it if that's your thing, like, right on. Play the games you want to play. But I think that there is, because it is so popular, but because it is so endlessly variable, and that everybody had a different experience, I don't know that making it in one movie would be the success that everybody thinks it is. I think that everybody would be like, yeah, Revan, let's go! And then if they make Revan a woman, all of a sudden everybody's crying woke, and it's trash, and it gets review bombed or whatever. Because to everybody, you can even change what Revan looks like. You can make him look like you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you could just say, take Revan out. But without Revan, what is the Old Republic? And in my opinion, the Old Republic is the setting of the Star Wars original trilogy thousands of years in the past. But it's the same setting. Because that game was going to be in the original trilogy, and then BioWare, is that who made it?
I think so.
They made the decision, let's just set it super far in the past so we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Right? But aesthetically, technologically, it is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think, like, what they've done with the High Republic, in a way, I think they've made a Knights of the Old Republic thing not possible. Because the High Republic is 200 years before Star Wars Episode 1, right? And they talk about in the novels that hyperspace going like into and back out of the Outer Rim is a new thing.
Yeah.
There's still pathfinding, and the galaxy is not quite as connected as it is later on. And that there's different things that the technology is nowhere near as good. Knights of the Old Republic, they have all of the technology that they have in the original trilogy. So I don't know that would work. I think that the bad news is they could, of course, just do it and be like, deal, Star Wars retcons all the time.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that the reality is they would want more creative freedom to do something wildly different. And I think that it would upset a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that's my... We might get something, though, like it. It's not quite the same thing, but they did announce the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi movie.
Right.
Could be another Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron, because shortly after Celebration last year, the entertainment strike happened, and all development on all things hit a hard pause for 8 months.
Yeah.
Right? But you know, we'll see.
Mm-hmm. And your number one.
So this is kind of a cheat, because this was never really announced. It's just been talked about, and we've heard things. And this is another like, ooh, I like what we got, but what could have been? Mm-hmm. So my number one is the original sequels to The Empire Strikes Back.
I don't...
So...
Okay, you have to explain.
Yeah. So let me preface. I love Return of the Jedi. I do. I think that it used to be the most underrated Star Wars movie. Mm-hmm. I think that title now belongs to Solo. Return of the Jedi has had a glow up in the last, 10 years or so. Sure. Mostly because I think now that there's so much Star Wars, people are seeing how hard it is to make a Star Wars movie. And like I talked about last episode, time. Time heals all wounds. But things that we were going to get. Luke's life as a Jedi. We were going to get Luke's sister, because she was a different character. Originally, and this is truth, you can find this, Yoda's line, no, there is another, in Empire, wasn't setting up Leia, wasn't setting up, Rey, setting up Luke's sister. We were going to have Episode 6, right, Return of the Jedi, but with a totally different name, was going to be about them rescuing Han, and Boba Fett was the main villain. Boba Fett and Jabba. And then we were going to get Episode 7, which was Luke's life as a Jedi, and then we were going to meet Luke's sister in Episode 8, who was having her own Star Wars. Cool. Completely unrelated. A totally different adventure. And then she gets pulled into the story, joins up, and then we have Episode 9, which was them all fighting Palpatine and Vader. Right? And that's all conjecture and speculation, and George had all these plans, and at the end of the day, the sad reality is The Empire Strikes Back about killed him, and he was like, I am wrapping this up in one movie. Not to mention, unfortunately, he was going through a divorce, and there was all kinds of legal stuff going on and money stuff going on. But just the idea of, and we've gotten a lot of these stories in other places, as always happens, but just the whole thing of, man, if we had Episodes 6 through 9 made in the 80s and 90s with just more George ideas, I don't know that all of it would have been home runs, and you probably could have milked the franchise dry, and then we never get the prequels and who knows whatever else. But just to have that much more Star Wars, that much more
original trilogy Star
original
Wars,
trilogy, and pushing the technology of filmmaking forward, led by George. If it had never stopped, it's mostly just the grass. Not the grass is greener on the other side, but that grass is interesting looking on the other side. Yeah. What would that have been like if all these movies had happened? So yeah, just that is endlessly fascinating to me, because now I'm sitting here going, who would have played Mark Hamill's sister in the mid to late 80s? Who would that have been?
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's my number one.
Nice. Well, there you have it. That's our top 5 canceled Star Wars projects that we want to see in some form of media, either in live action or comics or whatever. But yeah, that brings us to our final segment, which is our mailbag question. This one actually sent us into by a family member of the podcast, Mr. Mark Beutner, is it explained in the Vader comics or EU legends why Vader doesn't force sense that Luke and Leia are his kids? Or is he that brainwashed / manipulated by Palpatine that in Episode 5, when he learned of Luke's last name, that's when he began his redemption to the light?
This is a cool question. Thanks,
Yeah.
little brother.
Great question.
So, I mean, Zach, do you wanna take a swing at this one first?
So you've read more of the comics than I have, but if I remember correctly, Vader learns of someone named Skywalker in the comics, in between 4 and 5. And there is that amazing panel. It's a whole splash page, if I remember correctly, or if it's not, it's a whole page. You can look it up, and it's Vader so mad in the Force that he's standing on the Death Star, and the window in front of him cracks when he learns that there is somebody named Skywalker on Tatooine, and that's why he sends Boba Fett to figure out who this Skywalker is. So they kind of set it up in the comics, in the Vader comics. That he did kind of know a little bit, that they're at least somebody using his name, but I'm pretty sure Matt knows a little bit more. So I'm gonna throw
It was just a slight reverse of what you said.
Yeah.
They've established in canon that shortly after Star Wars Episode 4, he sends Boba Fett off to figure out who the hell that rebel pilot was that had the Force, and they have this little fight, Boba and Luke, where they kick each other's butts. Boba definitely wins, but they both escape. And Boba's like, all I found out was his name, Skywalker. And then you get that moment where Vader realizes that for about 20 years, Palpatine's been lying to him, and that he has a son. And then, as he's looking at, standing on the bridge of the Executor, the capital ship, and as he's looking out at the Imperial fleet. And he's just like, it will all be mine. And he's making fists just at his sides, and the window is splintering in front of him. Yeah. Yes. So that's when he finds out in canon.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, as to why he doesn't force sense, I think it also in the Vader comics and another run, it might be the Charles Soule run, we get the whole Vader going through his grief over Padme, and his exploration of the dark side and all that. And I think that's probably why he doesn't force sense them, is he's so in grief over thinking that they're dead that he doesn't reach out to see.
Right on.
Unless you have, do you have any theories on that?
Yeah. So again, little brother, fantastic question, but him not being able to force sense that Luke and Leia are his kids. I think it's a common misconception about Star Wars, but that's not how the Force works, right? Insert the Han thing. That's not how the Force works. The Force is consistently inconsistent. There is human error involved in it. Yeah. Always. And you can say that that's bad writing. I think it's more interesting writing. It's not Thor calling his hammer and flying into the sky, or Captain America throwing his shield, or Spider-Man shooting web shooters. There's human error in it. Mm-hmm. That's why Obi-Wan doesn't force speed to Qui-Gon in Star Wars Episode 1, even when we've seen force speed ahead of time. Darth Maul and Savage Opress have to retreat from pirates on the Clone Wars. The Force doesn't just, I activate force speed, right? It's, am I centered, am I focused, or is there chaos happening all around me, right? Am I exhausted and I'm trying to do everything I can to stay on top of my breath and stay centered and stay focused, or stay enraged if I'm a Darksider. But in Attack of the Clones, Anakin and Obi-Wan can't sense the Kohans about to kill Padme on the other side of a door because they're having an argument about Palpatine.
Yeah. And
then they go, I sense it too, and they run in. But there's a door between them, and that's it, and they couldn't sense it.
Yeah.
To Acolyte, May can't sense Chimera as a stranger. Mm-hmm. The entire Jedi Council, all of the most powerful Jedi in the universe, are sitting across a desk from Palpatine, and they have no clue that he is a Sith Lord. I think that if you're not looking for it, the Force isn't hey, by the way, here's ultimate knowledge, just in case you don't know. What were you gonna say?
In Rebels, I mean, Ahsoka knows who Vader is actively fighting against him, and doesn't realize it's Anakin until she like sits down and meditates and like reaches out and is like, it can't be Anakin, like, and then like she realizes it is, and it destroys her. Like that scene is heartbreaking when she figures out Vader is Anakin. You know, she's like, I haven't sensed my master, mainly because he's like gone because Darth Vader has taken over in his rage. You know, I killed him. He was weak, so I killed him. But yeah, I think that says it too. You know, like you gotta kind of sometimes be looking for it to figure it out.
Well, and the force of others, right? The force is about connection. That's what George was getting at. Vader figures out Luke is there, then he can sense him, and then over time, after they spend more after they fight in Empire, they have such a strong connection. He can talk to him from like ways away. He can sense when he's close, and then when he's digging into Luke's mind in Return of the Jedi, he figures out another connection Luke has to Leia, and he's like, "Oh, I got
Twins.
2 kids, great." And again, how twisted Vader was, another conversation, but not, yay, I have kids, but, oh, great. So if I have to kill you, cool, I'll just turn her. Not a problem. I got another option.
Yeah.
And so I think in the simplest versions, that's not how the Force works, right? And that is consistent. And number one, that leaves doors open for more stories. Because if the Jedi were all powerful, Star Wars is boring. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things about the Genndy Tartakovsky series, the 2D Clone Wars. Super fun. There's a reason Lucas never portrayed the Jedi like that. Because if they were, Order 66 doesn't happen. Yeah. And the stories are boring. Because the Jedi are all... If all the Jedi are Superman, Star Wars is boring. It just is. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that The Force Unleashed is a video game. Super fun video game. Super fun anime-inspired show, the 2D Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. But 3D Clone Wars is just, to me, it's the only way that canon could work, right? Where the Force is fallible because it's fallible people using it. Yeah.
Well, Matt and I have always said that the Genndy comics, or the Genndy Clone Wars is what the in-universe stories of the Jedi were like. You know, it's like what the wives' tales that people tell. They're like, oh, the Jedi were so powerful they could force push an entire army away. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's the legends, right? You know, as Ahsoka says, there's always a bit of truth in legends. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So the simplest answer to your question, Mark, is I don't think that's how it works. But I think it's a good thing. Yeah. That it's like that. And the second half of your question, or is he that brainwashed / manipulated that when he learned about Luke, that's when he began his redemption to the light? Yes. Yes, because at the end of Empire Strikes Back, through a whole movie we saw, was it 2 other times, an Imperial officer screws up and Vader kills him. At the end of that movie, after meeting his son, and then of course he tries to turn him and Luke leaves, he's not doing well, and they get away because Piet screwed up. Mm-hmm. And the camera moves in on Piet, and he thinks he's dead, and Vader just walks past him and goes and broods. He's starting to lose his will to do the dark side stuff, because even though he'll say, it's because I want you to overthrow the Emperor with me, he would really love to not be alone. That was loud. What was that?
Sorry, my window's open because it's very warm in this room. It's just a car that went by. Sorry.
No, you're literally fine. I was just like, the stormtroopers are coming. So yeah, I think we did it. I think we answered that question.
Yeah.
Good question, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we talked about a lot today, man. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
Yeah.
About all the stuff that we talked about.
Stories live on in our hearts and our minds, and nothing is truly dead as long as you believe in it. That's my wrap up for the episode, because we've talked about a lot of things that didn't happen, but you know, Rogue Squadron lives on in my heart. There's somewhere in there that, you know, I have a story in my head too. It's all about inspiration. You know, like, just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean that you can't like think of what it could be, and you know, stories live on.
Yeah, I just had an idea. That's something fun. If you want the Acolyte Season 2 to take place, pitch us or whether or not it does, pitch us your version of the Acolyte Season 2.
Yeah.
What would you do? Why not? This is fun.
Mm-hmm.
None of this is real, right? This is all make-believe. The point is that you're supposed to have a good time. You're supposed to forget about your troubles and watch a fun, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, nonsense TV show about space wizards and traveling faster than light through galaxies and everything else. It is fun. So yeah, that would be fun. If you got a pitch for the Acolyte Season 2, let us know, and we'll talk about it. Maybe we might do that at some point, just for funsies. I would love for it to be a fully funded Disney show that comes out, but I don't know. We're creative. What would you like to see? And to all that point, if you didn't like the Acolyte, cool. Let's talk about it. If you liked it, cool. Let's talk about it. If you are bullying people for having a different opinion than you, I would respectfully ask you to grow up. None of this is real. Just because somebody liked or didn't like something that you didn't like doesn't mean that you now have the moral high ground to take their lunch money or call them stupid. None of this is real. Just, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And I said it in my my video at the top of the last episode where I was like, oh my God, we have this episode, and then huge breaking news comes out later that same day. If you liked The Acolyte, I'm going to look, again, right down the barrel for this. If you liked The Acolyte, the good news is the season one still exists. It's not going away.
Yeah.
What it meant to you, what you learned from it is still there. Would I love more? Would you love more? Like, absolutely, right? We always want more. Us Star Wars fans are very greedy, especially for the things that we like. And nobody can take that away from you. So whether or not we ever see May, Osha, the Stranger, Darth Plagueis, all these things on screen again is open to who knows. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen is still there. Last thing I will say, in case we're feeling negative and we're feeling sad, right? Stay positive. Watch the next Star Wars thing. There's always more. There's more coming. The one thing you can guarantee about the Disney buyout, it's not going to go away. Yeah. When people are like, Star Wars is dead, I got bad news for you, man. Like, trailers for movies are coming out. Andor Season 2 comes next year. Skeleton Crew comes out in 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, there is more coming, and to quote The Rise of Skywalker, if for all the people that complain and that hate and that seek to destroy the things that other people's like, I would just say that all opinions are valid, but in terms of people that are positive, I think there are more of us. Mm-hmm. Not to mean that we're correct for liking it and they're wrong for disliking it, but I just, there's more of us that just watch a thing and like watching a thing. And then they don't get online and talk about it because they're moving on with their lives. So, yeah, I think we did it. Zach, where can the people find you?
I'm at Zachusfaction on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. But best way to find me is to email the show, forceofothersradio@gmail.com.
Right
Matt,
on.
where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Matt Beutner. I guess I should spell this thing Beutner, but good luck. And if you were upset about things that we talked about, let us know. I'm open to potentially even having you on the show. Just be respectful about it. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to have deep conversation. Force of Others is about connecting with all others. Yeah. There will always be more things for us to like and more things for us to wish took place. But in the meantime, yep, go ahead.
May the Force...
Oh, I thought you were...
Oh, no. I was going to the end. And as always, may the Force of Others be with you.
That wasn't really the tag.
No?
No.
Matt, hit it.
And remember, the Force of Others will be with you.
Always. I haven't done it in a few weeks, so... The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.